Welcome to Runner Pop Lessons. I'm your Runner Pop Uncle I. Here to drop some dimes and some jewels on you, get you a little education for your station. A lot of us ain't grew up in having civics class in school, but don't worry, your Uncle Ox here to bridge the gap. Now you're gonna get some information that you're gonna need today, because again, decision making and showing up to the polls severely impact not only yourselves but also our neighbors up north. But with no further ado, I'm gonna let them get the education on, then we're gonna talk a little more.
Politician in Canada is laser focused on one thing right now.
Donald Trump.
President Trump.
Donald Trump is making it crystal clear. He is not joking about Canada becoming the 51st state.
Pushing forward with his tariff threat.
The federal government is trying to placate the US president by ramping up border security at his request, making the case for why things like tariffs hurt everybody. And now, it seems, their attention is turning to another one of Trump's biggest grievances about Canada.
They have a very small military. They rely on our military. We basically protect Canada.
Yes, Canada's military. Trump believes Canada is taking advantage of the US, essentially expecting the Americans to defend it in an emergency, while contributing much less than promised to its own military.
The Americans believe that we're free riding on the security that they provide.
There are a number of people in the U.S. defense and national security community that absolutely think that Canada is a military free rider.
So, is it?
So, in other words, Big Man saying that Canada is operating like a stoolie. Basically, a stoolie is the young boy or the lieutenant to the bully. So while he is a victim himself, he's offered the protection of the bully. But let's get a little more game.
About a decade ago, at a meeting in Wales, NATO countries all agreed they'd aim to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense by 2024. The idea being that no one country, namely the US, would be stuck carrying the military weight of that alliance. Canada is part of NATO and signed that agreement. What it didn't do in the years that followed is reach that goal. In 2024, NATO estimates that Canada spent just under 1.4% of its GDP on defense. That's coming up somewhere close to $20 billion short.
Senior members of Congress, both houses, but including Republicans, have come out and said that Canada is underspending on national defense, not living up to its commitments, and basically taking advantage of the American security umbrella without contributing sufficiently to collective Western defense.
I love the Canadian people. They're great. But we're spending hundreds of billions a year to protect it. Our military is at their disposal.
And this isn't new. Military spending was an irritant for Trump during his first term, too.
We'll put Canada on a payment plan, right? I'm sure the Prime Minister would love that. What are you at? What is your number?
The number we talk about is 70% increase over these past years.
Okay. Where are you now in terms of your number? We're at 135? 1 point.
See how Big T putting the pressure on him? He don't want to put an actual number on it because the number that he puts on it is going to be so small and insignificant that it may make them look bad. That's why he offered the number of a 70% increase. If you're paying zero, 70% sounds like a lot, but it's still zero. If you're paying $1, 70% sounds like a lot, but it's just 70 cents.
3.
1.4.
That number, 1.4%. That was in 2019, and it's barely budged. And this at a time when NATO countries are feeling increasingly threatened by their most powerful adversary.
Across the NATO alliance, there's been a really significant increase in defense spending and defense preparation in response to what Russia did in February of 2022.
For whatever reason, it didn't motivate the same levels of spending in Canada.
Canada wasn't always an outlier. Back in 2021, before the war in Ukraine began, you know how many NATO countries actually did meet their 2% spending goal? Only 6 out of 31 countries that signed the agreement. So Canada had lots of company. But for 2024, it's projected that 23 of them, or almost 75% of those countries, will have met that target. Canada is among only 8 that won't, and it sits pretty close to the bottom of the pack.
And Canada can't really hide behind that mob mentality anymore. It's an outlier, and it's not just perception. Data points to that.
And that 2% target isn't the only target Canada's missing.
Now, I don't always agree with Big T, but right is right and wrong is wrong. All these other countries that ain't really close to us, they kicking in what they supposed to kick in. It's 8 countries that's not, but none of them in the same proximity that Canada is, I think, with the exception of Mexico. But still. But like I said, right is right, wrong is wrong.
Either. NATO members are also expected to put 20% of their defense spending towards military equipment. Last year, Canada was one of only 2 countries that didn't. And according to a recent Canadian Department of National Defense report, almost half of Canada's existing military equipment is unavailable and unserviceable.
So long story short, if they got to fend for themselves, somebody could just walk into Canada and just take it over. That's crazy.
They're invested for too long a period of time, and now we both don't have the numbers to back up our commitments in terms of the spending, but we don't actually have the results of what that spending would give us in terms of more aircraft, more vehicles, more ships to actually contribute operationally in a way that the Americans would care about.
The pressure really started ramping up on Canada to fulfill its NATO commitments last year. In July, NATO members met in Washington. Back then, Canada's official plan was to spend about 1.8% of its GDP on defense by 2030. Americans didn't like that plan.
Shamefully, Canada announced in the last few days or last couple of days that they won't be ponying up. They're not going to do their 2%. Why? Talk about riding on America's coattails.
What kind of signal does it send for Canada to be in the G7 when it essentially mocks the bare minimum of what's required?
Going into that summit, we were basically the only ally that was not only falling short of our spending commitment, but didn't even yet have a plan to get there.
And then, seemingly out of nowhere, on the last day of the summit,
Canada fully expects to reach NATO's 2% of GDP spending target by 2032.
That wasn't a small thing. Importantly, at least politically, it bought Canada time.
But Canada will now put in place a plan to be at 2% within a few years. So that means that all those allies who are not yet at 2%, they have a plan in place to be.
Sound like kicking the can down the road to me. And old boy stuttering so bad, you could tell he don't mean what he's saying, or if he just flat out lying.
At 2%.
But the Americans still weren't happy.
I do not speak for the President of the United States, the President-elect of the United States. If he were in this room, you would get a very large guffaw from him on talking about 2032. It's got to be better than that.
But in their eyes, it really wasn't, because not only was Canada effectively saying it would make its target 8 years late, at the time, officials didn't actually lay out any concrete details about how to get there.
So we have a timeline. They're going to meet it by 2032. No details as to how they'll actually achieve a massive undertaking, a massive amount of spending that will come as a result of this new commitment.
In April, the government did release a new plan to boost defense spending, mostly in Canada's north. But in the Trudeau government's last fiscal update, the fall economic statement, there was no new money for defense beyond what was already originally planned. And according to Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office, they aren't even on track to reach their original goal of 1.8%. This was just from this past October.
So that whole 2032 thing is a farce. Because the presumption would be is that there would be incremental increases. But as a result, and as you heard, it's going down. Ain't nobody got time for that. So they playing us like we chumps, it kind of sound like. So now I kind of understand why he be mad about certain stuff. Because, you know, they clowning us, basically. Yeah. We're gonna pay y'all. We're gonna pay y'all by 2032, but ain't gonna pony the bread up. And matter of fact, we're gonna start slipping on the payments we is making. Kind of sound like they sending a message, don't it?
Based on our analysis and independent GDP projections, the government's latest military spending forecast reaches only 1.58% of GDP by 2029-2030. That's worth repeating. 1.58% by 2030, because what the government is saying now is that it can reach 2% even sooner by 2027.
Just to clarify, in 2 years, you think you can hit 2% of GDP spending?
I think it's absolutely achievable.
That's 5 years ahead of the schedule they had just 6 months ago. But once...
I don't know. Is it me? Or did he just call the prime minister a liar? Because they said 2032. He said they could be running by 27.
Once again, they haven't explained how they're going to get there.
What's the plan to pay for it? Where's the money going to come from?
It's remarkably difficult to maneuver Canadian tax dollars to achieve something like a sudden increase in defense spending.
So what's the rush? Why yet another announcement without a costed public plan to go along with it? Well, Donald Trump is the X factor.
He's weaponizing tariffs to get various concessions out of America's trading partners.
We basically painted a target on ourselves.
Long story short, Big T done declared war on what used to be called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, where basically we wouldn't put tariffs on Mexico and Canada and vice versa, so that we not have a tedious back and forth with the monies. But considering all the shortfalls that we appear to be seeing relative to certain contributions that certain countries supposed to be making, I kind of see why he's mad. So in a nutshell, despite who you voted for, our president is our president. And while he's not right about a lot of things, a lot of times, and we may not see eye to eye, certain things, a broken clock is right twice a day. You don't have to see eye to eye with everything that someone says in order to agree with the commonality of things that we can agree upon. What we can agree upon is that if everybody else is kicking in what they supposed to kick in, then the people that's closest to it should be kicking in the fastest. Well, this your Uncle Ock, what you run a pop lesson for the day. Remember, civics classes is important. Teach your kids about civics classes since they don't teach them in schools no more. And if you don't know what to teach your kids, then maybe you need to learn it along with them, and y'all can learn as a family. Till next episode, this your Uncle Ock from Up the Block. I love y'all, and we're going to get together again real soon to have some little discussion about what's going on.